Hello, gorgeous human beings. It is the author spotlight again. So I have another author who's going to share their journey with you, going to tell you about their highs, their lows, and what they wish they'd known before. And we hope it will inspire you to get that book published. But we also ask you to encourage you to support this author and share, like, and comment on their book. So please, without any further ado, let's welcome Zoe Dronfield into the studio. So welcome, Zoe.
Hi, Cheryl.
Hi.
Thanks for having me.
So you've written the book. Let's just pop it on the bottom so people can see it. The book is called Mind Over Manipulators.
Yes.
It conjures up all sorts of stuff in my head. So we'll come back to the book and find out a bit more about the book and why you wrote it. But before we do that, just tell us a little bit about becoming an author for you has been like what?
So for me, the book was, I suppose, a cathartic because it's about my journey and my story and what I've done since that. But also its credibility in the field that I've now found myself in. So the book is about my journey around domestic abuse, and I've found myself in 2014 in a serious situation which nearly cost me my life. I was almost murdered.
No.
But what followed that was the journey that I had to take to navigate our justice system. And justice systems, actually, because it was the criminal courts, the family courts, dealing with the police, dealing with various health, because I had mental health appointments, if you like. I had a brain injury. I had lots of different clinics that I had to go to, and all of this was just extremely exhausting. And I just thought, how does anybody navigate that kind of system? It is entirely exhausting.
And so for you, when you've been through all that and you had all those systems to navigate, what kind of cathartic is it? What is it about the book? What's worked about becoming an author?
So it was telling my story and giving my side of the story. So in terms of the attack, it was highly publicized in the press. It went global, actually. It was viral on the internet. And so if you put my name in Google, you'll find loads of information there, because I've since done quite a lot of work with government to change laws. But with news and press, they only ever get a snippet of information out there. And it was always the injury picture of my injuries, my battered face, and then the story about the attack, which was, I was tortured for 8 hours. I was stabbed. It was quite horrific, so that becomes the snippet, the headline. But actually, that wasn't the worst part. And I know that sounds ridiculous, and you'll have to read the book to understand it. But navigating all of the things that I had to do afterwards was truly soul destroying, and it's compelled me to do what I do today, which is the campaigning and lobbying government to change and tighten laws.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's just, like you say, it is a snippet, it's a moment in time. And I
Yeah,
guess there was a load that happened before that moment as well, isn't there? That's part of it.
absolutely.
So I think you've probably touched on it already, but we're just sort of clarifying. Why did you write this particular book then, Mind Over Manipulators?
So specifically for me, I've done because I've done so much work publicly around domestic abuse and stalking, and I've been doing a lot of lobbying. I often have hundreds of victims contact me over the years. I've been campaigning since 2014, since the attack actually happened, and it was for me to be able to get my story out there from the beginning to the end, but also to inspire others to not stay in victim mode, and to empower and inspire people to come through this as a journey. You don't have to stay in victim mode. It's something that happened to us. We're not defined by it. And actually, you can become a stronger and more confident person if you just position things in the right way. And that's why I say mind over manipulator, because for me, mind, all said and done, when the attack happened, I was then dragged through family court. I had custody of my daughter removed for 4 months, which was horrific, I have to say. And the only thing I had left was my mind and my ability to be able to, fight back intelligently, if you like. So I just did a huge amount of work around domestic abuse, stalking, laws, what were my rights, and I found that quite a lot of the time professionals were wrong, and I raise this all the time, and I complain, and I talk about this in the book, say, be prepared if you're going into court, understand the process, go and have a look around the courts if you can, understand the process, understand the laws, understand your rights, and I think lots of victims just assume that the system works. It doesn't. And and I really, it's an activist call to just not roll over and take what's given to us. We can push for change, and we can say that this isn't right.
So it sounds like there's two sides. One, it's about this, the system not working and not being there and being able to find your voice and speak up and say, no, that's not okay. And then there's this other part where you get the whole of your story heard, which I know that's quite tough actually, someone when it comes to writing something, because how did you decide? Because I'm sure you can't put every single piece of detail in a book. You have to work out what you're going to put in and what not. How did you decide what was the most relevant parts of your story?
What I did is I looked across my life. I've had quite a lot of poignant situations in my life. So I lost my mum when I was 6 years old. So I was a young girl growing up without a mother. I didn't have that caregiver. And so I kind of start with these big events that have happened in my life, and then how they've shaped me, and how they maybe came to push me down a road that, had I had certain education, I wouldn't have gone down. And in the book, after each chapter, each chapter has a huge event in it. I talk about the red flags in that chapter, and then I reflect as well on what actually happened in my life, and it's to support the reader so that they can be educated. And it's not just for victims, it's for professionals that are working with victims, for them to understand from a victim perspective how it feels to go through this kind of thing.
Absolutely. So as an author, because that sounds like I'm making up, but I'm assuming that there's a lot of emotion and you're being cathartic. There's also probably some healing going on as you go back through that journey, because you said that you wrote the very first, when we were offline, you said you wrote the very first chapter in 2014, and that it's taken you a while to actually write it. You said 2 years?
2 years, like, where I was really focusing on all my spare time getting the book written, and some chapters were easier than others. When I was going back to my childhood, it was quite easy because I'm quite more removed from that, but actually the family court stuff, it's still quite raw for me, and it's still quite triggering. So having those chapters were quite difficult to write. And I sought help in the writing, because to try and do that on my own, I did write the one chapter in 2014, and it was like, there is a thing that we've all got one good chapter in us, but then where'd you go? And then how do you turn that one chapter into an actual book that's then, it's actually in print and you can hold it, So I sought the help of the book mentor, Karen Williams, and she helped me really shape the book and how I kept going to the next level, and it was just having somebody who can push you along. And I often have imposter syndrome. I often feel like, one of the first things, and Karen will tell you this, one of the first things I said when we first met, I was like, well, who cares? Who cares what Zoe Dronfield says about this, that, and the other? And it's actually, now I have the book, and now I have it in my hands, and now I'm promoting it and talking to colleagues that I work with. They're like, God, you have so much credibility now, Zoe, because you're an author. You're a published author, and it's a great feeling. It really is.
It's surprising, and I don't think I used to hear that before. Write a book and you'll build credibility, but I guess it's only until you actually go through the journey and you realize the time, the effort, and the research and the things you have to do, because you have your experience, but you have to clarify everything you're going to say when you're putting it into print. It's much easier when you do. Well, maybe I find it easier talking, and where it kind of goes off in the ether. But when it's going to be a permanent record of it and it's going to be used as a reference,
100%.
The energy and the effort that it takes is far more. So on that note, what's the most important thing that you've learned going through this process as an author?
For me, starting with one chapter wasn't the right way to do it. Because you kind of, I'd been such a perfectionist around this one chapter. I couldn't go anywhere else. Whereas I just stripped it all back and got my headings for each chapter, and then really worked it out from there, rather than trying to build from one chapter up. But I mean, there's so many things I feel that have come out of me being an author now. The fact that I can say I'm an author, the credibility that comes with that, the fact that I have got my entire story down, and when I am asked about my story in the press, in the media, which often happens, I can point them to something that gives them the whole story, which I often talk about certain parts of the book in news, and it doesn't ever really give the full impact of what I've been through, and the book
No.
will show that and tell the story.
So for you, it's not about just having one chapter, but getting that overview and those clear headings.
Yeah.
And what do you wish you'd known before you started?
Well, I don't know whether I wish I would have known, because if I'd have thought it was going to take me 2 years, I might not have done it.
Yeah.
So, it was, when I started doing it, but I have to say that at every milestone, when I got another chapter written, when I kind of just scribbled down everything and got that rough draft done first, it was like, okay, well, you've done that milestone, now tidy up the draft, so I got great pleasure out of just those different milestones that you have to go through when you're writing a book.
Yeah.
Does that answer the question? I don't know whether I did.
Well, yeah, it's like you wish you know, you're not sure if you did want to know that it would take 2 years. And I think there is that bit where sometimes it's ignorance is bliss.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I guess that's the thing, is that it does take time sometimes. There is some people do seem to write it down, although Karen and I have this conversation all the time. Karen tends to percolate in her head for quite some time, and then suddenly this book appears, and I think, oh, she just wrote that in 6 months.
Yeah.
I'm not angry, cross, or frustrated, or jealous at all. But we have this conversation because I will talk about it quite a lot, and then eventually the book comes to, where she tends to percolate.
I'm probably more like that, Cheryl. I'm talking about it, writing down notes, got papers everywhere, and then I'm like, oh my God, I've got everything everywhere. But eventually it does start to come together. And it's,
I think that's the most important thing, is to know it's a process, and like all processes, it depends perhaps how much you've already processed the emotions and stuff before you start the actual work, and maybe some of them, like you said, are raw and you have to go through that. I know for my own journey, particularly I'm realizing there's a little bit in the book I'm thinking I'm not actually doing that yet myself, and I don't want to publish it till I'm taking my own advice, because I've realized it's what I've helped my clients do for years, and I was like, oh, I haven't done that yet. So that it's all part of that process, isn't it? You learn about yourself as you go through it.
And another thing that Karen said to me was, you don't have to put everything in one book, Zoe, because the book does kind of cover, it's 100,000 words. It's a big book, and I could have kept going. And it was like, Karen, I had an editor as well, and I self-published, so I had somebody helping me with that. So, they were like, stop writing. It's hard not to keep, once you've got the momentum as well, it's hard not to keep going. But I think just decompartmentalizing what you want to do.
I think that's what I love about Karen, though, is that she does keep you on track and remind you your purpose and the reason you're doing it. And and often, if there is a big story, like you've been through yourself, that there's so many aspects to that I suspect some of those chapters are actually books in themselves.
Yeah.
And therefore, there'll be offshoots later where you'll go into them a lot more detail.
100%.
And she's so good at keep reminding you so that you don't get lost in your own stuff.
And also to understand who your reader's going to be, because that was one of the first things that we talked about. She was like, oh, who's the book for? Well, I was like, everyone. And it's really, I really see now it's very important to have your reader kind of nailed down, if you like, who that's going to be, who your kind of target audience is. And I noticed, over the last couple of weeks, I've done a few events, and I've had my book, and it's always my target audience that are there coming up to me at the end, and it's really interesting to see actually that it physically turns that way. So
and that's where the clarity of that stuff can really help. So what was the lowest point on this journey as an author?
I suppose sitting with the one chapter for so long, because I did the one chapter in 2014, and then literally it wasn't till, I don't know, 2020. I kept looking at it thinking, well, how do I do this? So that was frustrating, because I'm usually somebody who, when I make a decision, I'm going to do something, I do it. So, and then another low point was probably trying to trudge through those chapters that I found difficult. I found that a real hard slog, but I persevered and just got through it.
Yeah. There. So what worked for you to get through those chapters that were a bit of a slog?
I timed so I would give myself a time, because it was quite triggering. So I would think, right, I'm going to do an hour, and even if I only read something and I don't actually write any words, even if I just use that hour and I'm completely focused on the book, and I set a timer on my phone, an hour, and I would spend time, and eventually those hours add up, and when you come back to it the next day to do your next hour, you can pick up where you left off. So yeah, small steps when
I
it's
think
a struggle.
Yeah, and there's a really important part there, because I think a lot of authors forget that sometimes the process of getting the wisdom from out of your head and even your experience out of your body, because you are, like you say, being triggered, there's stuff going on, is that sometimes there's nothing to show for it but the thinking and the reading and the researching or talking about it to people. That's
Yeah,
all part of the process, and we can get very judgy of ourselves because there's no words on the paper, whereas
yeah,
actually recognizing that, if, like, in my case, if you're someone that wants to walk the talk, or you're having to relive trauma, it's a process, it's going to take
yeah,
time, but recognize it's really lovely to hear that you're acknowledging that part, and so many people don't. When they're an
yeah.
author, they forget that's part of it.
Well, there was also the part where when Karen would read read back what I'd done, and she said, this bit's a bit ranty. I think I might have had a glass of wine when I was doing that one.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah,
It's so important to have that objective feedback, though, isn't it?
yes,
Because
100%.
when
Yeah,
when it is a cathartic part, and it is part of your almost your therapy, and it's part of the healing journey for yourself, when you write the book, it's so important to have our story witnessed. There is a process of going from a story where you're talking about it from a healed wound, healed scar, rather than open wound. And I think that's why I love having Karen on my side, because I can get her to read something, and she can. Sometimes it's just I need someone to witness that part of the story, and then
yeah,
once it's been witnessed, it doesn't have to go in the book.
yeah,
So I'm so glad you had the help and support for that.
yeah.
So, what's your biggest success to date?
Oh, wow. Um, Personally, or I mean, we've had quite a lot of wins along the way with my campaigning and lobbying. I mean, I think the campaigning and lobbying that I've done since writing, well, since my journey started, since the attack, I was involved with government and speaking to them. But we've had the domestic abuse bill introduced. We've extended the stalking sentences. Within the domestic abuse bill, there's various things that we'd lobbied for previously: the strangulation laws, the cross-examination of victims of domestic abuse in family court, and just strengthening those laws. That's a huge thing. But I mean, it always feels like it's never the end, because just getting a law changed isn't the end of that. You still need to then train the police. They need to be able to use it. So this is a constant thing. But I'm really proud of the fact that my story has enabled me to have a public profile, to be able to press for change. And the backing that I get from other victims and survivors is amazing, because it compels me to continue what I'm doing. So I mean, there's lots of
Yeah,
things there.
yeah. But
Yeah.
and since writing the book, though, or actually committing this last 2 years to actually getting on the book, is there any specifically that you can sort of relate to the actual book as a win that's come
Well, I
from
think
that?
that I think the credibility of having the book is a big win, because actually, I just did a conference at Sheffield for South Yorkshire Police, just back end of last week, and you know I sold a few books there, and it will help the police in their job. So, like I say, it's not just for victims, it's also for professionals to understand from the victim's journey.
The victim's
navigating.
perspective.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because it is hard, isn't it, if anybody really to really understands when they've got something that's been detailed out like that. So tell us a little bit more. So is there anything about the book or anything else you want to tell us about the book? Because we've kind of touched on it's your story, but what is it that who is the reader, and what do they get from the book?
So the reader would be a female, possibly a mother. There's talk around my children and the fact that I went through family court. 25 to 45 age range, something like that. But I mean, it's not to pigeonhole, because professionals, and I think that male professionals in particular, should read the book and should read it with an objective mind and understand that, it is difficult for women navigating those institutions. There is a lot of victim blaming, and, for example, comments are made around you as a victim of domestic abuse in family court. Decisions are made, actually, that somehow you're blamed for the abuse that you've received, and it is massively a culture shift. So, I want the book to be a message for people to change that attitude as well.
Yeah.
So it's not just about my perfect reader, which would be the female who's been through abuse and is looking to get empowered, inspired, and come out and not just thrive but conquer in their life. It's also for professionals as well. And actually, off the back of the book, I have written a course. It's not yet out there, but I've written module 1, and the course is going to be from victim to survivor, from survivor to thriver, and then from thriver to warrior and conqueror of your life. So I want to take everybody through this journey, hopefully.
Fabulous. So those of you, if you're looking, you can now see it on the screen. So we've got the Mind Over Manipulators. I can't put my teeth around that, so I was trying to. And we've also got here the ticker tape that's telling you about the actual website. So you can go to zoedronfield.com/buy my book, and you can get the book there. And it's also on Amazon if you want to get it there. So a massive thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today, Zoe. I look forward to hearing about more success. And please feel free to come back on the Author's Spotlight and tell us what happens next. And we'll see you soon.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So another Author's Spotlight. So I hope that this has inspired you to think about your book. Please comment below. Tell us what you learned from Zoe. Tell us what you'd like to have happen next. And as always, just reach out to Karen or myself if you'd like some help with your book. Speak to you soon. Bye.